My daughter-in-law called my house the perfect nest for her baby, a home I poured my own blood, sweat, and tears into for 20 years. Then, she tried to hand me my own eviction notice, thinking I would just pack my bags and disappear. She never expected my reply. "Darling, you forgot one thing. My name is on the deed." The karma that followed? Absolutely brutal. This isn't just a story about a house. It's about a mother's breaking point. About the moment a quiet woman decides she's had enough. Before we get into the whole messy affair, I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from. It's a quiet afternoon here in my little corner of Oregon, just outside Portland. Tell me in the comments what city or country you're in and what time it is for you. It's nice to know we're all connected, sharing a story together. It makes the world feel a little less lonely. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Before the whispers and the schemes, there was peace. The kind of peace that settles deep in your bones, warm and familiar like a favorite quilt. My mornings always started the same way. The Pacific Northwest sun, soft and gray, would filter through the large kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, silent fairies. The smell of freshly ground coffee, dark and strong, would fill the room, a scent I'd associated with home for over 2 decades. This house, it's more than just wood and nails and plaster to me. It's a living thing, and its heartbeat is intertwined with mine. My late husband, David, and I bought it when it was nothing more than a skeleton, its bones groaning with every gust of wind that blew in from the valley. The paint was peeling in long, sad strips, and the porch sagged like a tired sigh. "It's got potential, Carol," he'd said, his voice echoing in the empty rooms, his eyes sparkling with a vision I couldn't yet see. We were supposed to fix it together, a project for our future. Life, however, had other plans, and a heart attack stole him from me just 6 months after we signed the deed. After I lost him, this house became both my burden and my salvation. It was a project that kept my hands busy and my mind from spiraling into grief. Every restored floorboard holds a memory of my tears, the salty drops mingling with the wood stain. Every perfectly aligned cabinet in this kitchen is a testament to my resilience, a monument to the hours I spent watching online tutorials, rewinding and rewatching until I understood. I learned plumbing from library books with cracked spines and electrical wiring from grainy videos hosted by men with thick, indecipherable accents. I remember the 3 weeks I spent on the fireplace, chipping away old mortar until my fingers bled, resetting each stone one blister at a time. This wasn't a house I inherited. It was a promise I rebuilt with my own 2 hands. So when my son, Mark, called me last fall, his voice tight with worry, saying he and his wife, Tiffany, had hit a rough patch financially, my answer was immediate and unequivocal. "Of course you can stay here," I'd said without a moment's hesitation. My heart ached for him, and truth be told, I was lonely. The silence in these halls had grown heavy over the years. The thought of laughter filling them again felt like a gift. Tiffany arrived all smiles and calculated sweetness, calling me mom from the first day. She'd bring me tea I didn't ask for, compliment my wilting garden, and talk endlessly about how lucky she was to have a mother-in-law like me. For 8 months, it was pleasant on the surface. I saw my son happy, and I started to believe that maybe this was how my golden years were meant to be, surrounded by family. I was so wrapped up in the picture-perfect image she projected that I didn't see the artist sketching a completely different, darker scene in the background. I thought I was lucky to have them, but I didn't realize that the peace they brought was just the deep, quiet breath a monster takes before it screams. The evening it all began, Tiffany made my favorite meal, pot roast, slow-cooked for hours until the meat was fork-tender, the carrots glistening with juices. The whole house smelled of rosemary and memory, a deliberate culinary nod to the life David and I had shared. It was a masterful performance. She and Mark were practically glowing at the dinner table, their faces lit with a shared, secret excitement. Then between bites of creamy mashed potatoes, they exchanged a look, a quick, charged glance that I would later to recognize as a silent, well-rehearsed signal. "Mom," Tiffany began, placing her fork down with a delicate click. She rested a hand on her still flat stomach, a theatrical gesture of impending motherhood. We have some absolutely amazing news. Mark beamed, his face alight with a genuine, uncomplicated joy I hadn't seen in years. "You're going to be a grandma, Mom!" The words hit me like a wave of pure, unadulterated happiness. A grandchild, a new life to fill the rooms David and I had so lovingly restored. A tiny hand to hold, popsicle juice to wipe off the porch deck. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring their smiling faces. I got up to hug them both, my heart feeling like it might just burst from my chest. We celebrated with a bottle of sparkling apple cider I had in the pantry, the cheap bottle feeling as celebratory as the finest champagne. We toasted to the future, to the baby, to our growing family. In that moment, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. The joy was so overwhelming, so bright, that it blinded me to the shadow that was creeping up right behind it. It was later, as we were clearing the plates, that the other shoe dropped with a sickening thud. So, we've been thinking a lot about the baby and what's best for him. Or her, Tiffany said, her voice smooth as polished honey. She didn't look at me, but at the layout of the kitchen, her eyes scanning the cabinets and countertops as if she were a designer assessing a client's outdated space. "We want to give this baby the absolute best start in life." Mark cleared his throat, suddenly finding the chrome faucet incredibly interesting. "Yeah, Mom. With the baby coming, we're going to need more space. A proper nursery, a place that's safe and quiet." I nodded, still wrapped in the warm glow of the announcement. "Of course, sweetheart, the guest room is all yours. We can paint it any color you'd like. I've always thought a soft yellow would be lovely. We can get a crib, a changing table." She cut me off with a little laugh, a sound that was supposed to be light and airy, but landed with the weight of a stone in my gut. "Oh, Mom, the guest room is sweet, but it's so small. And it's right next to your office. All that typing. And what we were thinking is that the master bedroom would be perfect." My smile faltered and died on my lips. My bedroom? The room I had shared with David? The room where his old armchair still sat in the corner, the leather worn smooth by his presence, the room that faced the quiet backyard garden. "It has the large ensuite bathroom," she continued, ticking off the features on her fingers as if she were a realtor assessing a client's outdated space. "It's much quieter, away from the road. It would be much better for me with late-night feedings. I'll need my own space, my privacy, to bond with the baby." I looked at Mark, my own son, expecting him to see the absurdity, the sheer breathtaking audacity of her suggestion. But he just shrugged, a weak, apologetic gesture that was somehow worse than outright agreement. "She's right, Mom. It makes sense. And we even found a solution for you. There's a lovely one-bedroom apartment downtown. It's in a senior living complex, really cozy and right on the bus line. No stairs to worry about. We already toured it for you." My world tilted. The air left my lungs. They weren't asking for my room. They were asking for my house, my life. They spoke of it as a kindness, a favor they were doing for me, shipping me off to a cozy little box while they took over the home I had built. I stood there, speechless, the soapy dishwater growing coals on my hands. They weren't asking, they were telling. And the worst part wasn't what they said, but the casual, entitled way they said it, as if my departure was already a settled fact. And the truly terrifying thing was, this was only their opening move. The worst was yet to come. I didn't give them an answer that night. I couldn't form the words. My throat felt thick with a mixture of shock and a rage so deep and primal, it felt like it could crack the very foundation of the house. I simply mumbled something about being tired and retreated to my room. my room, and locked the door. The click of the lock felt like the first act of defiance. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, telling myself it was just a thoughtless, selfish suggestion, a product of youthful entitlement mixed with pregnancy hormones. I told myself Mark, my sweet boy, whom I'd taught to ride a bike on this very street, would come to his senses. He would come to my door in the morning, ashamed, and apologize. He didn't. There was no apology. Instead, what followed was a quiet, insidious campaign, a psychological war of attrition fought not with loud words, but with small, deliberate acts of erasure. Tiffany, I soon realized, was a master of this silent warfare. It started in the kitchen, the heart of my home. For years, I'd started my day with coffee in a heavy ceramic mug I'd bought on my first solo road trip after David passed. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a journey to prove to myself I could still navigate the world alone. The mug had a faded logo of a diner in Santa Fe, and holding its familiar weight felt like holding a piece of my own hard-won independence. One morning, it was gone from its hook. In its place hung a new mug, a garish, glittery pink thing with a cartoon elephant smiling up at me. When I asked about my old mug, Tiffany just chirped, her voice dripping with false concern. "Oh, that old thing. It had a tiny chip in it. I was so worried you'd cut yourself, Mom. This one is much cuter and safer, don't you think?" I found my Santa Fe mug later, wrapped in a paper towel at the bottom of the kitchen trash can. There was no chip. A few days later, I came home from the grocery store to find the living room completely rearranged. My husband's favorite armchair, a worn leather wingback that I'd positioned perfectly by the window to catch the morning sun for my reading, had been shoved against the back wall, half blocking a bookshelf. It looked awkward and sad, like an old man at a party where he knew no one. "Doesn't this open up the space so much better for a play area?" Tiffany asked, not waiting for an answer, as she fluffed a cushion on the sofa. "The feng shui in here was all wrong for a baby. We need positive energy flow." My positive energy, in David's memory, had just been shoved into a dark corner. The invasion continued in the pantry. My shelf, my little corner of comfort with my peanut butter pretzels and saltine crackers, was suddenly bare. In its place were jars of almond flour, bags of quinoa, and expensive organic baby snacks. "Just clearing out some of the junk food, Mom," Tiffany said breezily when she saw me staring at the empty space. "We need to make this a healthy, toxin-free environment for the baby." She was treating my life, my preferences, my very presence like a toxin that needed to be cleansed. Each change was small, almost petty on its own, but together they formed a clear, brutal message. You are outdated, you are in the way, this is no longer your space. She started having mail delivered, addressed to the family of Mark and Tiffany Miller, at my address, a subtle but significant claim of ownership. She'd leave swatches of paint colors on the dining room table, all muted beiges and pale, insipid yellows, with notes like "future nursery" or "living room update." Mark was a ghost in his own home, always on his phone, always avoiding my gaze, a willing accomplice in his silence. When I tried to talk to him, to appeal to the son I knew, he'd just say, "Tiffany's just trying to help, Mom. She's nesting. It's a hormonal thing. Just try to be patient." He was letting it happen. He was watching her slowly and methodically erase me from my own home. And he was doing nothing. Each day I felt myself shrinking, becoming a guest in the house I had poured my soul into. I was still holding on to the foolish hope that he would wake up. But I was about to discover something that proved this wasn't just nesting. It was a cold, calculated, and deeply sinister conquest. The breaking point, The moment my grief and simmering frustration curdled into an ice-cold, terrifying clarity came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The sky was the color of slate, and the rhythmic drumming of rain against the roof was the only sound in the house. Mark and Tiffany had gone out for a doctor's appointment, and the quiet was a blessed relief. I was in my small home office, a room I'd carved out of a large closet, sorting through old tax documents when I realized a specific file was missing. It was the file containing the home insurance policy and recent property tax statements. I thought maybe I'd left it in the guest room, which they had been using as their own. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open, calling out, "Just looking for a file," to the empty room. That's when I saw it. Tiffany's sleek silver laptop was open on the desk, the screen still lit. She must have forgotten to close it in her rush to leave. My first instinct was to look away, to respect her privacy as I'd always done. But a phrase in an open email caught my eye. The subject line read, Mortgage application, Miller property. A cold dread washed over me, a physical sensation that started in my stomach and spread through my limbs. I told myself to walk away, that it was none of my business, but it was my business. It was my property. I stepped closer, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I scanned the text, my hands starting to shake. It was a thread between Tiffany and this broker discussing in chilling detail the possibility of refinancing my home. My home.
As we discussed, the broker had written, the best path forward would be a quitclaim deed to add you and your husband to the title. Once you are co-owners, we can proceed with a cash-out refinance under all three names. This would give you the liquid capital you need for the renovations you've planned. My breath hitched in my throat. A quitclaim deed. Co-owners. Cash-out refinance. The legal jargon was a language of theft. They weren't just planning to live here. They were planning to own it. To strip my sole ownership, leverage the equity I had spent 20 years building, and take out a loan against my asset for their renovations? The muted beiges and pale yellows suddenly seemed much more sinister. I scrolled up, my finger trembling on the trackpad. I found an earlier email from Tiffany to the broker. Her words were composed with a chilling, calculated casualness. My mother-in-law is getting older and a bit overwhelmed by the upkeep of such a large property, she wrote. My husband and I are stepping in to take over the financial responsibilities. We want to ensure the property stays in the family and is properly maintained for our future child. She's on board with us being added to the title for simplicity's sake, to make managing the bills and taxes easier. A lie. A complete and utter fabrication, designed to paint me as a feeble, consenting old woman happily handing over her life's biggest asset. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of the desk. She had hidden my financial documents and was now using their absence as proof of my incompetence. I backed away from the laptop as if it were radioactive, my mind racing. The rearranged furniture, the replaced mug, the condescending comments about my junk food, it all clicked into place with horrifying precision. It wasn't about nesting. It was about establishing dominance, about a systematic campaign to make me feel like a stranger in my own home, to weaken my resolve and make me question my own mind. They wanted me to feel so uncomfortable, so powerless, that when they finally presented me with the legal papers, I would just sign them out of sheer exhaustion and defeat. That afternoon, the grief I felt for my son's betrayal was a physical weight. But underneath it, something else was stirring. A cold, hard, crystalline anger. A resilience I had forgotten I possessed. They had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. They had mistaken my kindness for stupidity. They thought they were dealing with a little old lady they could easily manipulate. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. My heart had broken, but my spine had just turned to solid steel. They had made a fatal error. They had underestimated me. And that was the moment I stopped being a victim and started forming a battle plan.
Before I could even formalize my own counter strategy, before I could even fully process the depth of her treachery, Tiffany escalated her campaign in a way that was far more public, insidious, and humiliating. She started targeting my neighbors, specifically Mrs. Gable from across the street. Mrs. Gable, Martha, has lived on this block even longer than I have. She's a nice woman at heart, but she's also a notorious gossip, the kind who keeps a mental log of everyone's comings and goings and whose curtains are always twitching. We'd always had a pleasant, over-the-fence relationship, sharing gardening tips and complaining about the city's new recycling rules. But recently, I noticed Tiffany spending more and more time talking with her. I'd see them from my kitchen window, their heads close together in conspiratorial whispers, Tiffany's expression a mask of deep, manufactured concern as she gestured vaguely towards my house. The first direct impact hit me one Thursday afternoon. I was bringing in my empty trash cans from the curb when Martha hurried over, her face etched with a kind of pitying worry that immediately set my teeth on edge and made my hair on my arm stand up. "Carol, dear, are you feeling all right?" she asked, her voice hushed as if she were discussing a terminal illness. "I'm perfectly fine, Martha. Why do you ask?" I kept my own voice light, refusing to betray the sudden pounding in my chest. "Oh, it's just Tiffany was telling me. She's so terribly worried about you. She said you've been misplacing things, forgetting to pay bills. She mentioned you even lost an important insurance document the other day and couldn't remember where you put it." I froze, the plastic handle of the trash can digging into my palm. She was talking about the tax file I'd been looking for, the one that led me to her damning laptop. Tiffany not just misplaced it, she had hidden it. And now she was using my frantic, manufactured confusion as proof of my incompetence. She was building a narrative, not just for herself and Mark, but for the entire neighborhood. "I'm not forgetting things, Martha," I said, my voice firmer than I intended, a cold edge creeping in. "Things are just being moved around a lot lately." Martha gave me a look that said she didn't believe me for a second. It was a look of profound pity, the kind you give to someone who doesn't even realize how far gone they are. "Oh, you poor dear. You don't even see it's happening." "Well," she said, patting me arm condescendingly, her touch feeling like a brand, "it's a true blessing you have Mark and Tiffany here to look after you. A big house like this is a lot for one person to handle, especially when, well, you know." I knew exactly what she meant, especially when you're old and losing your mind. I turned and walked back into my house, my cheeks burning with a humiliation so intense it felt like a physical blow. This was her new weapon, gaslighting on a community scale. She was methodically isolating me, turning my friends and neighbors into her unwitting allies in my downfall. She was trying to strip me of my credibility, to make me into a character in her tragic little play, the confused elderly mother who desperately needed her savvy, caring daughter-in-law to take control. If anyone questioned why I was being moved out of my own home, she would already have an answer ready for them. It's for her own good. We had to step in. She just can't manage anymore. She wasn't just trying to take my house. She was trying to take my identity, my sanity, my reputation. She was trying to erase the competent, strong woman who had rebuilt this house from ruins and replace her with a senile caricature. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. It was evil, plain and simple. And that was the final piece of motivation I needed. My fight was no longer just about property. It was about reclaiming my very life. And that's where I have to pause and ask you all, what would you have done in my shoes? When someone is not just disrespecting you, but actively trying to paint you as incompetent to the outside world, how do you fight a war when the enemy is smiling to your face and stabbing you in the back? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Okay, back to the story. That night, her little ploy with Mrs. Gable backfired spectacularly because she didn't just make me angry, she made me focused. She lit a fire under me that would eventually burn her whole deceitful world to the ground. The gaslighting campaign with the neighbors was Tiffany's biggest mistake. It was an act of hubris that clarified everything. I was no longer just a mother dealing with an entitled daughter-in-law. I was a homeowner, a citizen, and a woman defending her assets and her sanity against a calculated, malicious threat. The time for hurt feelings and quiet endurance was over. It was time for action. The very next morning, before the sun had even fully risen, while Mark and Tiffany were still asleep upstairs, oblivious in their den of lies, I drove to my bank in the next town over. I deliberately chose the branch where I had a safe deposit box that they knew nothing about. I walked into the cold, silent vault, the air smelling of old paper and steel. The teller used two keys to open my box, and I slid out the long metal container. Inside, nestled amongst David's old love letters and my mother's pearls, was the original deed to my house. The paper was crisp, the signatures of David and me, signed with such hope all those years ago, as clear as the day we wrote them. My name was there, Carol Miller, as the sole surviving owner. There were no co-signers, no liens, no clauses they could possibly exploit. It was mine, unequivocally, legally. I didn't go home. I drove straight to a copy shop with a notary public on staff. I had several certified copies made, each one stamped and embossed with an official seal. I returned to the bank and placed the precious original back in the cold, dark safety of the vault. One certified copy I tucked deep into the lining of an old tweed suitcase in the back of my closet, a forgotten relic from a life before this one, a place no one would ever think to look. Another copy I placed strategically in my office desk drawer. I didn't hide it well. I left it right under a stack of envelopes where a casual search would easily find it. Let them find it. Let them think they'd discovered my only copy. Let their arrogance make them careless. My next stop was the public library, not for books on gardening or novels, but for legal statutes. I sat in a quiet corner for hours, surrounded by the smell of old books, and read everything I could find on tenant rights and eviction law in the state of Oregon. The words on the page were a revelation. They were a shield and a sword. I learned the legal definitions. They were, in the eyes of the law, tenants at will. They had established residency, yes, but they had no lease and had never paid a dime of rent or contributed to a single utility bill. I had every right to ask them to leave with proper, written notice. That afternoon, I began a new, grim project. I opened my laptop and created a spreadsheet. I went through my bank statements and utility bills for the past 8 months, my finger tracing each line item. Every dollar for electricity, water, gas, and high-speed internet went onto the spreadsheet, dated and categorized. I researched local rental listings and calculated a fair market rent for the 2 rooms they were occupying. I went through my grocery receipts, meticulously estimating the cost of the food they'd consumed. It was a cold, methodical process. And with every number I entered, with every cell I filled, I felt a piece of my power returning, a sense of order being restored to my chaotic world. My final call was an old friend of David's, a semi-retired lawyer named Arthur, who specialized in real estate law. I explained the situation, leaving out the emotional drama and sticking to the cold, hard facts: the attempt to be added to the title, the residency without a lease, the gaslighting. He listened patiently, his occasional a reassuring sound on the other end of the line. "Carol," he said when I was done, his voice calm and steady as a rock, "you are in a much stronger position than you think. The law is on your side. We just need to document everything and proceed correctly." He gave me the exact, legally binding wording for a formal eviction notice, a document that would be impossible to argue with or ignore. I went to bed that night feeling a profound calm I hadn't felt in months. Mark and Tiffany were downstairs watching TV, their laughter from some mindless sitcom floating up the stairs. They were completely oblivious. They thought they were winning, moving their little chess pieces around the board when I wasn't looking. They had no idea I was about to flip the entire board over. The war for my home had been declared in whispers and lies, but it would be won with notarized documents, cold hard numbers, and the full force of the law. The countdown had begun. I want to take a quick pause here. Following this story, a journey filled with so much deception and emotional turmoil can be quite draining. I want to thank you all for sticking with me this far. The fact that you're still here, still listening, means a lot. It tells me that these stories of standing up for what's right, of finding strength when you feel powerless, really resonate with people. If you're still with me on this journey, do me a favor and just type the number 1 in the comments below. It lets me know you're here and gives me the encouragement to keep sharing these important moments. Your support is everything. It's the fuel that keeps this channel going. All right, back to it. So there I was. I had all my pieces in place, my ducks in a neat, legally fortified row, the secured original deed, the detailed financial records, the sound advice from Arthur. I was armed and ready for battle. But a good general knows that timing is everything. A premature attack could be disastrous. I couldn't just march downstairs, wave the papers in their faces, and start yelling. That would lead to exactly the kind of scene Tiffany thrived on. A screaming match, crocodile tears, and wild accusations. She would immediately play the victim, the poor, pregnant, hormonal woman being viciously attacked by her cruel, unhinged mother-in-law. Mark would feel cornered, his loyalty torn, and he would likely default to protecting his vulnerable pregnant wife. No, my move had to be precise, unemotional, and irrefutable. It had to be delivered not in the heat of anger, but in the cold light of day. It had to be a checkmate, not just a check. So, I waited. For a week, I lived a double life. On the outside, I was the same quiet, accommodating Carol. I made polite conversation. I passed the salt at dinner. I endured the small, daily indignities. Tiffany, emboldened by my silence, grew more confident. The baby-proofing gadgets began to appear, plastic plugs and outlets I'd used safely for 30 years, soft foam corners on coffee tables. She bought a massive, ugly diaper pail and placed it in the main hallway, where its presence was a constant plastic declaration of her impending reign. She would hum cheerfully as she rearranged photos on the mantelpieces, moving a picture of me and David to a less prominent spot to make room for a framed sonogram picture.
But now, instead of feeling the sting of hurt, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was an anthropologist observing a foreign tribe, documenting their bizarre rituals before their habitat was about to be reclaimed. Every condescending comment from Tiffany, every averted gaze from Mark, I logged it away not as a personal insult, but as another piece of evidence. Evidence for myself. To remind me why I had to do this, why I had to be strong. They were so confident, so utterly sure of their victory. That confidence, that arrogance, was about to become their biggest liability. They were about to make their final move, thinking it was the winning one, the one that would finally push me out the door. But I knew something they didn't. They weren't pushing me towards the exit. They were walking, hand in hand, right into the trap I had so carefully and patiently set. The moment of confrontation arrived a week later, on a Saturday morning. The air was thick with a cloying, artificial sweetness. Tiffany was making pancakes from a box mix, humming a cheerful, off-key tune as she moved around my kitchen like she owned it. She'd bought a new syrup, some fancy, overpriced maple agave blend in a bottle shaped like a leaf, and it sat on the counter like a trophy from a battle I didn't know we were fighting. Mark stood by the fridge, scrolling on his phone, a human wall of deliberate indifference. They were a team, a well-rehearsed duo about to perform their final act. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of black, bitter coffee, my hands perfectly steady around the warm ceramic. On the outside, I was a quiet woman in her 50s, calmly starting her day. On the inside, I was a general on a hilltop, watching the enemy army march predictably into the valley I had chosen for the battle. Tiffany slid a plate of perfectly golden, perfectly round pancakes in front of me. They looked beautiful, and I knew they would taste like ash in my mouth. She sat down opposite me, her smile bright and brittle, her eyes glittering with a triumphant light. "Mom," she started, her voice oozing with a rehearsed sincerity that made my skin crawl.
Mark and I have some wonderful news for you. We know how much you've been worrying about your next steps, about finding a new place and all the stress that comes with it. So, we went ahead and took care of everything for you." She slid a cheap blue plastic folder across the table. It glided over the smooth wood and stopped right beside my coffee cup. My name was written on the tab in her loopy, girly handwriting, Carol. My hand was steady as I reached for it. I opened it. Inside, the first page was a lease agreement for the one-bedroom apartment in the senior living complex they'd mentioned. It was already filled out with my personal information she must have gotten from the very documents she'd hidden from me. Behind the lease was a copy of a cashier's check. They had paid the first month's rent and the security deposit for me. "It's all taken care of," Mark said, finally looking up from his phone. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "We thought that would give you enough time to pack up your personal things." There it was. Not a suggestion, not a discussion. It was a verdict, an expulsion notice, packaged as a gift. Tiffany reached across the table and placed her cool, smooth hand on mine. Her touch felt like a spider. "We did this because we love you, Carol," she said, using my first name for the first time. The shift was deliberate, a subtle demotion from mom to a peer, or perhaps even a dependent child being managed. "We want you to be safe and comfortable, without the stress of this big old house. It's time for you to relax and let us handle things from now on." This was it, the moment they thought they had won, the final condescending act of kindness that was meant to seal my fate. They expected tears. They expected arguments. Or maybe, best of all for them, a quiet, defeated resignation. They expected me to crumble. I slowly, deliberately, pulled my hand from under hers. I folded my napkin and placed it neatly beside my untouched plate of pancakes. I looked at the lease agreement, at my name typed out on a future I hadn't chosen. Then I looked at Tiffany's triumphant smile and Mark's cowardly refusal to meet my eyes. The rage I'd been carefully banking for weeks was now a cold, clean, purifying flame. I looked at Tiffany, and for the first time I let her see the solid steel behind my quiet smile. I said, "Thank you for your concern, dear." I said, my voice even and calm without a single tremor. "But you seem to have forgotten something very, very important." I stood up from the table. Mark and Tiffany exchanged a confused glance, their victory lap cut short. "You've been so busy making plans for me that you never stopped to consider the plans I've been making for you." I paused at the doorway, turning back to them. The look of utter confusion on Tiffany's perfectly made-up face was the most satisfying thing I'd seen in months. "But don't you worry, I have all the paperwork right here." I walked back into the kitchen, the thick manila envelope feeling solid and righteous in my hand. The air in the room had changed. It was no longer filled with their smug confidence. It was thick with tension. The sweet smell of the pancakes seemed sickly and out of place. I didn't slam the envelope on the table. That would have been too emotional, too theatrical. I placed it gently, but deliberately, right between the butter dish and their cheap blue folder of lies. It made a soft, definitive thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Tiffany stared at it as if it were a venomous snake, her perfect smile finally faltering and melting away. Mark looked up from his phone, which he had dropped onto the table, his face a mask of confusion and a dawning, terrible dread. "What is this?" Tiffany asked, her voice losing its syrupy sweetness replaced by a sharp, brittle edge. "Why don't you open it and see for yourselves?" I said, resuming my seat and taking a calm, slow sip of my coffee. I held their gaze over the rim of my mug, letting them squirm. Mark's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the envelope. He fumbled with the metal clasp before finally pulling it open. He pulled out the first document. His eyes scanned the top of the page, and I watched the color physically drain from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. He was looking at a certified, notarized copy of the deed to the house. The bold letters across the top were unmistakable. Sole owner, Carol Miller. This is the deed," he stammered, looking at me as if I were a stranger, a woman he had never truly seen before. "That's right," I said, my voice as even as a frozen lake. "My name. and my name alone, as it has been for the last 20 years, since the day your father passed away." Tiffany snatched the paper from his limp grasp. She read it, her eyes darting back and forth, searching for a loophole, a second name, a forgotten clause that wasn't there. Finding none, she tossed it back on the table with a flick of her wrist. "That's just a piece of paper, a technicality. It doesn't change the situation." "Oh, but it does," I said, nodding towards the envelope. "There's more. Keep reading." Mark hesitantly pulled out the next set of papers. It was my spreadsheet, now professionally formatted and printed, looking as official as any legal document. The title at the top read, "Invoice for Room, Board, and Utilities Rendered." It was a meticulously itemized account of the last 8 months of their residence in my home. Fair market rent for 2 bedrooms, $1,200 a month. Utilities, water, gas, electricity, averaged out to the dollar. High-speed internet, groceries, even a line item for household supplies like laundry detergent and paper towels. The final total was printed at the bottom in bold, unforgiving type, $15,342.78. Mark made a small choking sound in the back of his throat. Tiffany was utterly speechless, her perfectly painted mouth opening and closing as a fish out of water. "You've been living here as my guests," I explained, my voice devoid of all emotion, clinical and precise. "A courtesy I extended to my family. But the moment you decided to treat this arrangement as a business transaction, by attempting to take over my property, by hiding my financial documents, and by presenting me with a lease for my own eviction, you changed the terms of our relationship. So I have responded in kind, with a bill for services rendered." I let the silence hang in the air for a long, heavy moment, letting the weight of the $15,000 reality sink in. Then I gave a slight nod. "There's one more thing in there. The most important part, really." With a sense of finality, his movements slow and robotic, Mark pulled out the last document. It was a legal, formal, 30-day notice to vacate the premises. It was addressed to both of them, Mr. Mark Miller and Miss Tiffany Miller. It cited the relevant Oregon state statutes and was signed by me, with a neat little line at the bottom indicating that it had been reviewed by my legal counsel, Arthur Vance. The room was utterly, completely silent. The only sound was the low, indifferent hum of the refrigerator. Tiffany finally found her voice, a harsh, strangled whisper. You're evicting us. Your own son? Your pregnant daughter-in-law?" She placed a hand on her belly, the ultimate shield, her last-ditch appeal to sentimentality. I looked at her hand, then back at her face. The mask had finally shattered. All the sweetness was gone, replaced by the raw, ugly fury of a thwarted predator. I stood up and took my coffee cup to the sink. I said, turning on the water and rinsing the cup, the simple domestic act a stark contrast to the drama unfolding behind me. "Your utility silence. The game is over. Checkmate." But the drama was far from finished. I still had one more card to play, a devastating truth I hadn't even known I possessed. The days that followed were suffocatingly quiet. The house, which had once been filled with her false laughter and my son's oblivious chatter, became a dead zone of slammed doors and heavy, angry footsteps. Tiffany refused to even look at me, her presence a toxic cloud of resentment. She communicated her rage through passive-aggressive bangs and crashes in the kitchen, dropping silverware into the drawer with unnecessary force, slamming cabinet doors with a violence that made the dishes rattle. Mark, for his part, tried to leave little notes for me, scraps of paper torn from a legal pad, tucked under my door or left by the coffee maker. They all said variations of the same thing. "Mom, can we please talk?" But I ignored them. There was nothing to talk about. The documents had said everything. The time for talking was over. About 2 weeks before the eviction deadline, a new routine had settled in. They would leave the house for hours at a time, looking at apartments, I assumed. One afternoon, while they were out,
I decided to do a preliminary check on the guest room to document its condition before they moved out. I wasn't snooping, just being prudent. I had my phone out, ready to take pictures of the walls and carpet. As I was emptying the small trash can by the desk to make the room look tidy for the photos, a crumpled receipt caught my eye. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought, but the name of the restaurant printed on it in elegant script was the Gilded Perch, one of the most expensive and romantic spots in Portland. The date was from about 5 weeks prior. Curiosity, a cold and sharp-edged thing, got the better of me. I smoothed out the receipt on the desk. It was a dinner for two. Two very expensive tasting menus, a bottle of champagne, an odd and frankly alarming choice for a pregnant woman, I thought, and two elaborate desserts. The total, with tip, came to over $400. A wave of anger washed over me. They had been living in my house for free, claiming poverty, while spending this kind of money on a single meal. Then I looked closer. I remembered that night clearly. Mark had called to say he was working late on a big project at the office. Tiffany had told me she was feeling tired and was just going to have a quiet night in, maybe take a bath and read a book. My blood ran cold when I saw the signature on the credit card slip. It was Tiffany's name, but the payment was split, half on her card and half on another. The name signed on the second slip wasn't Mark. It was Kevin. Kevin. The name rang a faint, discordant bell. I racked my brain, sifting through the months of her superficial chatter, and then it hit me. Months ago, when she was still in her charming phase, Tiffany had mentioned an ex-boyfriend named Kevin. She'd described him as a wealthy, older man she dated before she met Mark, dismissing him with a wave of her hand as too controlling, a total workaholic. Why was she having a secret, intimate, and wildly expensive dinner with her controlling ex-boyfriend while lying to my son about her whereabouts? And why champagne? The question echoed in my mind. I carefully folded the receipt and slipped it into the pocket of my jeans, where it felt like a small, cold stone. My mind was racing, connecting dots I hadn't even seen before. The lies, the manipulation, the desperate grab for my house, it wasn't just about providing a nest for her baby. There was something else at play, something much darker. That night, I looked at Tiffany differently. I watched her as she talked about her pregnancy symptoms, as she put her feet up on the ottoman, asking Mark to fetch her a glass of water. I saw the way she patted her stomach, the way she used the baby as a shield, a justification for every demand, every act of entitlement.
A tiny, poisonous seed of doubt began to sprout in the back of my mind. It was an awful, ugly thought, one I'd tried to push away as being too monstrous to contemplate. A mother should never think such things about her own grandchild. But the receipt in my pocket felt like a cold, hard fact. She was a practiced, accomplished liar. She had lied about the house, about my mental state, about her finances. What else was she lying about? The question hung in the air of my quiet house, terrifying and unavoidable. I suddenly realized that the battle for my house might have been won, but the war for my family's truth was just beginning, and the biggest casualty might not be the house at all. I held on to that damning receipt for 2 days. It felt like a toxic secret burning a hole in my pocket, a piece of evidence from a crime I hadn't yet fully defined. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I couldn't confront Mark with it directly. He was already emotionally shattered, a ghost drifting through the house. Throwing an accusation of infidelity at him now, in his fragile state, would just make him defensive. Tiffany, the master manipulator, would twist it instantly. She would claim Kevin was just an old friend, that I was snooping, that I was making things up to justify my cruel decision to evict them. She would paint herself as the victim yet again. I had to be smarter than that. I had to let him find the truth for himself. I chose my moment carefully. It was a Thursday evening. The 30-day deadline was looming, less than a week away. Tiffany had gone out, claiming she was meeting an old girlfriend for a decaf coffee and to pick up some maternity clothes. The lie was so casual, so easy for her, it was chilling. Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a stack of apartment rental listings, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight had completely gone out of him. I poured 2 cups of chamomile tea and set one down in front of him. For a long time, we just sat in the comfortable silence we used to share before Tiffany had arrived and poisoned it. "I know you're angry with me, Mom," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper, not looking up from the listings. "I'm not angry, Mark. I'm hurt. There's a difference. Anger fades. Hurt leaves scars." He nodded, a barely perceptible motion. "I messed up. I know I did. I just wanted to provide for my family, for the baby." "I know," I said. And then I saw my opening. I decided to use her own weapon against her. "The baby," I started, keeping my tone light and conversational, as if the thought had just occurred to me. "Speaking of the baby, have you two thought about all the modern genetic testing they can do now? It's really amazing what science can tell you before the baby is even born. Your cousin Sarah and her husband did the full panel. They can check for all sorts of health markers, genetic conditions. It gives you such peace of mind as a parent. And you know," I added, stirring my tea, "they can even confirm paternity with near 100% certainty from a simple blood test from the mother now. It's just part of the standard prenatal workup for a lot of couples, a way to be fully, completely prepared." I watched him closely over the rim of my teacup. His head snapped up, his eyes locking onto mine for the first time all evening. They were filled with confusion. I didn't look away. I held his gaze, my expression one of calm, motherly concern. "Paternity?" he repeated, the words sounding foreign and strange in his mouth. I gave a casual shrug, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Of course, it's just a box they tick on the form usually. It's for medical records mostly, to have a complete and accurate genetic history for the baby. It's the responsible thing to do, to make sure you have all the information you need to be the best father you can be." I didn't mention Kevin. I didn't mention the receipt. I just planted the seed of a question in the fertile ground of his existing misery. I framed the idea of a paternity test not as an accusation against his wife, but as a responsible, proactive action of a concerned father-to-be. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, the terrible new logic clicking into place, the confusion, the denial, and then a flicker of the same horrible doubt that had been haunting me. He'd been so blinded by the idea of becoming a father that he'd never stopped to question the foundation of that reality. I stood up and patted his shoulder gently. "Just something to think about, sweetheart," I said, before leaving him alone with his thoughts and his lukewarm tea. I had given him the idea, the tool. Now it was up to him to decide if he had the courage to use it. I walked out of the kitchen and up to my room, my heart heavy with a grim sense of foreboding. I had no idea if he would follow through, or if he would choose to live in blissful, cowardly ignorance. What happened next was completely out of my hands, and it would either tear our family apart for good or expose a truth more shocking and devastating than I could ever have imagined. For 3 days, the house was quieter than ever. It was an unnerving, heavy silence, the kind that feels like the air before a tornado. Mark was a ghost. He was physically present but utterly withdrawn, spending hours locked in his room or going for long, aimless drives, returning with his eyes red-rimmed. Tiffany seemed oblivious, or perhaps she was deliberately ignoring the thunderclouds gathering over her husband's head. She continued to chatter on about nursery decorations and potential baby names to a man who barely responded. Her cheerfulness was a shrill, grating noise in the tense quiet. I stayed out of their way, giving the poisonous seed I had planted time to grow in the dark soil of his misery. The explosion came on Sunday afternoon. The sky outside was a bruised purple, threatening a storm that mirrored the one about to break inside my house. It started with a sound from upstairs, a low, guttural cry of pure, animal anguish. It wasn't a yell of anger, but of profound, soul-shattering pain. It was Mark's voice.
It was followed immediately by Tiffany's, high-pitched and frantic. "What is this? Where did you get this? Are you crazy?" Then came the crash, the sickening sound of something heavy, like a wooden drawer, being thrown against a wall, followed by the sharper, more final shatter of something made of glass, a picture frame maybe. I was in the living room, trying to read but only staring at the words on the page. I shot to my feet, my heart hammering against my ribs, a cold dread washing over me. I ran to the bottom of the stairs as Mark came stumbling down, his movements clumsy, uncoordinated. His face was ashen, his eyes wide and vacant with a horrifying combination of shock and unbearable clarity. He was clutching a single piece of paper in his hand, his knuckles white and bloodless.
"Mom?" he whispered, his voice cracking, breaking on the single word. He looked utterly broken, like a little boy who had just seen the world for the monster it could truly be. He held out the paper. It was an email, printed out from a home computer. The letterhead was from a company called DNA Diagnostics Lab Center. I didn't need to read the details, the scientific jargon. My eyes were drawn to the key phrases, printed in a cold, unforgiving bold font. Alleged father, Mark Miller. And further down the page, the devastating conclusion, the 2 words and 1 symbol that had detonated his entire life. The probability of paternity is 0%. 0. The number was so absolute, so final, so cruel. He had done it. He must have ordered an at-home test online, sent it in secretly. He knew. "It's not mine," he said, the words barely audible, a puff of empty air. "The baby, it's not my baby." He sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, his legs giving out from under him. He buried his face in his hands, his whole body shaking with ragged, silent sobs that were more painful to watch than any scream. Tiffany came flying down the stairs behind him, her face a grotesque mask of tears and fury. The victim act was on full display, but it was cracked and desperate. When she saw me standing there, her rage found its target. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling, accusing finger at me. "You did this! You've been poisoning him against me from the start! You couldn't stand to see him happy, you evil old witch!" "Happy?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. The cold anger gave me a strange strength. Was he happy when you were lying to him every single day? Was he happy when you were having $400 champagne dinners with your ex-boyfriend? Her face went slack, the accusation hitting her with the force of a physical slap. Her eyes widened in panic. She knew I knew. Mark's head shot up from his hands, his tear-streaked face now filled with a new dawning horror. What dinner? What is she talking about, Tiffany?" The lies were unraveling, one by one, a chain reaction of deceit. And she was trapped in the middle of it all. She opened her mouth to spin another tale, to create another reality, but just then, a sound from outside cut through the raw, ugly drama in our hallway. It was the sound of a car horn, a short, impatient beep from an expensive-sounding German vehicle. Tiffany's head snapped towards the front door, and in that one reflexive motion, I saw it all. The panic, the desperation, and the sudden cold realization that her time was up. Her escape plan had just arrived. The final, unbelievable act of this sordid drama was about to unfold right on my front porch. Mark and I both followed Tiffany's panicked gaze to the front door. Through the beveled glass panels, we could see a sleek black convertible, a Porsche, I realized with a jolt, parked in my modest driveway. It looked alien and predatory amongst the sensible sedans of my quiet suburban neighborhood. The horn beeped again, a little longer this time. It wasn't an angry sound, it was a summons, an impatient tap on the shoulder from a world of wealth and secrets. Without another word to either of us, without a single glance back at the man who was weeping on the stairs, Tiffany turned and ran up the stairs. The sound of her frantic footsteps echoed above us. Mark made a move to follow her, his hand reaching for the banister.
Then he stopped, slumping against the newel post as if his strings had been cut. The fight, the anger, the pain, it had all drained out of him, replaced by a hollow, vacant emptiness. I walked to the door and opened it, letting the cool, damp air of the impending storm rush in. A man I'd never seen before was leaning against the car, the picture of casual arrogance. He was wearing designer sunglasses despite the overcast sky and an expensive-looking leather jacket. He looked to be in his 40s with carefully styled hair and an air of impatient entitlement. He didn't smile when he saw me. He just gave a curt, dismissive nod and looked past me, towards the house, expecting his prize to emerge. It had to be Kevin. He had come to collect his property. A few minutes later, Tiffany came down the stairs. She was a different woman from the hysterical, cornered person of moments before. She wasn't crying anymore. Her face was composed, her makeup miraculously intact. She was pulling a large, stylish suitcase on wheels and had a designer purse slung over her shoulder. She looked like she was heading to the airport for a luxurious weekend getaway, not fleeing the ruins of a life she had systematically and cruelly destroyed. She walked right past Mark without a single glance. He was invisible to her now, a tool that had served its purpose and was now being discarded without a second thought. She didn't look at me either. There was no apology, no exclamation, no flicker of remorse in her cold, hard eyes. There was only the chilling efficiency of a person cutting their losses and moving on to the next opportunity. She walked out the front door and down the path that I had laid with my own hands. Kevin, her rescuer, opened the passenger side door for her. She slid into the plush leather seat, and he closed the door with a soft, expensive-sounding click. He walked around to the driver's side, got in, and started the engine. It purred to life, a low, powerful growl that vibrated through the quiet neighborhood, a sound of obscene wealth and moral bankruptcy. I stood in the doorway, a silent sentinel, watching as the black Porsche backed out of my driveway. Tiffany stared straight ahead, adjusting the visor, never once looking back. She never looked back at the house she had tried to steal, or at the man she had fooled so completely, or at the life she had pretended to want. The car pulled onto the street and accelerated, its tires hissing on the damp pavement, and disappeared around the corner. And just like that, she was gone. A mirage of sweetness and lies vanished as quickly as she had appeared. The silence she left behind was profound and absolute. It was heavier than any of the shouting that had come before. It was a silence filled with everything that had been broken, everything that had been lost. Mark was still leaning against the post, staring at the empty driveway, at the space where the car had been, as if he could will it to reappear. He looked like a statue, frozen in the exact moment his world had shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. I gently closed the front door. The click of the latch echoed through the now cavernous hall. The drama was over. The villain had made her grand exit, but the fallout was all around us. The house felt contaminated, littered with the emotional shrapnel of her lies. I knew that before my home could truly be mine again, before any real healing could begin, there was still one more person who had to leave. The healing couldn't start until all the ghosts of this sorry, sordid chapter were finally gone.
Mark didn't leave right away. He stayed for 3 more days, a quiet, mournful presence in the house that had so recently been the stage for his life's great betrayal. He slept in the guest room, the door always closed. I'd hear him moving around at odd hours of the night, the floorboards creaking under the weight of his regret. During the day, he was a whirlwind of silent, penitent activity. He didn't ask for my forgiveness. I don't think he felt he had the right to. He didn't try to explain himself, because what explanation was there? He simply worked. It was the only language he had left. He started in the living room. With a reverence that broke my heart, he moved David's heavy leather armchair from the dark, dusty corner where Tiffany had shoved it. He placed it back in its rightful spot by the window, positioning it carefully, angling it just so to catch the morning light, exactly as I had always kept it. He took down the pale yellow paint swatches she had taped to the walls, one by one, and threw them in the trash. He went through the pantry and threw out all the expensive organic baby snacks and bags of quinoa, and the next day, a bag of my favorite peanut butter pretzels appeared on the kitchen counter. He worked in the garden for hours, pulling weeds with a silent, focused intensity, his back bent against the gray Oregon sky. He trimmed back the overgrown rose bushes I hadn't had the heart to tend to for months. He fixed the loose step on the back porch, the one I'd been meaning to get to for ages, hammering it into place with firm, definitive blows. Each task was a quiet, physical apology. Each nail hammered, each weed pulled, was an act of contrition. He was trying to undo the damage, to erase the marks Tiffany had left not just on the house, but on our lives. On the fourth morning, I came downstairs to find him in the kitchen, his 2 duffel bags packed and sitting by the door. He'd made a pot of coffee, the familiar aroma a ghost of happier times. He poured me a cup without a word, his hands steady now. "I'm going to stay with a friend for a while," he said, his voice quiet but clear, the first real sentence he had spoken to me in days. "Rick, from college. He has a spare room. I need to get my head straight, find a job, find my own place." I just nodded, sipping my coffee. Words felt inadequate. He reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a folded check. He slid it across the counter to me. It wasn't for a large amount. I knew he didn't have much, but it was something. It was a beginning. "It's not even close to what I owe you, Mom," he said, finally meeting my eyes. There was a deep, profound sadness there, but for the first time in a long time, there was also a flicker of the responsible young man I had raised. The shame was still there, but it was no longer crippling him. It was motivating him. "It's not even close to what I owe you, Mom," he said, finally meeting my eyes. There was a deep, profound sadness there, but for the first time in a long time, there was also a flicker of the responsible young man I had raised. The shame was still there, but it was no longer crippling him. It was motivating him. "Yes, I do," he said firmly, a resolute in his voice I hadn't heard before. "I let this happen, Mom. I was weak, and I was stupid, and I let her hurt you in your own home. This is my mess. I have to fix it. I have to stand on my own 2 feet." He was right. It was the first time in almost a year that he sounded like himself, like the son I knew, the son I loved. He picked up his bags. At the door, he turned back, his hand on the knob. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I hope one day you can forgive me." I watched from the living room window as he walked to his car. He didn't look like the broken boy who had sobbed on the stairs. He looked like a man who had made a terrible, life-altering mistake and was now taking the first, difficult steps to atone for it. As he pulled out of the driveway, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a profound sense of sorrow and a tiny, fragile glimmer of hope that maybe someday my son would find his way back to himself. The house was finally, truly quiet. And in that vast, echoing quiet, I could finally begin to heal. For the first time in nearly a year, the house was truly mine again. The silence was no longer heavy with unspoken tension or thick with resentment. It was a clean, empty canvas, a blessed relief. For a full week, I did nothing but reclaim my space, performing a kind of gentle domestic exorcism. I opened every window in the house, even in the chilly Oregon autumn, letting the fresh, damp air chase out the stale energy of conflict and deceit. I burned sage in every room, walking from corner to corner, a ritual that felt silly and deeply necessary. I watched the gray smoke curl towards the ceiling, carrying away the ghosts of Tiffany's presence. I scrubbed the kitchen floor on my hands and knees, erasing the memory of her smug pancake breakfast. I took the hideous pink elephant mug, the one that had replaced my beloved Santa Fe souvenir, carried it out to the garage, put it on the concrete floor, and smashed it into 1,000 glittering pieces with a hammer. It was a shockingly satisfying act of violence. I swept up the fragments and put my own mug back on its rightful hook. I sat in David's chair, in its proper place by the window, and read a book for 3 straight hours, uninterrupted. I was taking my house back, inch by inch, memory by memory. But when I stood before the guest room, their room, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a hollow echo of the lies that had been spun there, the false dreams that had been planned within its walls. The room felt tainted, energetically bruised. I knew I couldn't just leave it empty, a shrine to a painful memory. An empty space can invite the wrong things to fill it. It needed a new purpose, a better purpose, a purpose rooted in healing, not in hurt. An idea began to form, a way to transform this space of betrayal into a space of sanctuary, to spin the straw of my pain into gold for someone else. I spent the next 2 weeks working with a renewed sense of purpose. I pulled up the cheap beige carpet Tiffany had insisted on installing and was thrilled to find the original hardwood floors underneath, scratched but solid. I spent 3 days sanding and refinishing them myself, the physical labor a balm for my soul. I painted the walls a soft, calming sage green, the color of new growth. I bought a new bed, simple and sturdy with a solid wood frame, and dressed it in clean, crisp white linens. I added a small oak writing desk by the window and a sturdy bookshelf. I went through my own collection and filled it with books I loved, novels with strong female characters, books of poetry by Mary Oliver, stories of survival and hope. When the room was finished, it was unrecognizable. The air in it was light. It was no longer a guest room for family that had betrayed me. It was a haven, a soft place to land, a room of one's own.
Then I made the most important call I'd made in a long time. I looked up the number for the local women's shelter, the Rose Haven Center downtown. I took a deep breath and dialed, my heart beating with a nervous, hopeful rhythm. I spoke to a kind-voiced woman named Maria. "My name is Carol Miller," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I have a spare room in my home. It's safe, it's private, and it's quiet. I'd like to offer it, free of charge, as a temporary residence for a woman who is transitioning out of your shelter and needs a stable place to get back on her feet." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a moment of surprised silence. "Mrs. Miller," Maria said finally, her voice thick with emotion, "you have no idea what a gift that is. You have no idea how much this is needed. We have so many women who are ready to move forward, but they have nowhere safe to go." We worked out the details. The arrangement would be informal, a short-term stay of 1 or 2 months for women who had a job or a solid plan but just needed a bridge to their next independent step. No rent, no strings attached. Just a quiet space to breathe, to plan, to rebuild. I hung up the phone, a feeling of profound peace settling over me. I had fought for my house, for my little piece of the world, and now I was going to use it not as a fortress to keep people out, but as a sanctuary to let the right people in. The ugliest chapter of my life had just given birth to the most meaningful mission. The house was no longer just a monument to my past, it was now a beacon for someone else's future. The first woman to arrive was named Sarah. She was a quiet woman in her 40s with tired, haunted eyes, but a gentle, resilient smile. She came with just one small suitcase and a potted orchid that she carried in her arms like a precious, sleeping child. When I showed her to the room, her eyes welled up with tears. "I haven't had a door I could close and lock in over a year," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. That night, from my own room down the hall, I heard the soft, definitive click of the lock on her door, and I smiled. It was the most beautiful, triumphant sound in the world. Sarah stayed for 2 months.
She worked tirelessly at her job at a local diner, saving every penny. She was quiet and respectful, and slowly, over shared cups of tea in the evenings, I saw the light come back into her eyes. She left on a sunny Saturday to move into her own small apartment across town, the first place that was truly hers. She left the orchid on the windowsill as a thank you. It's still there, and it's bloomed twice, its vibrant purple flowers a constant reminder of her quiet strength. After her came a young artist named Maya who filled the house with the smell of turpentine and the sound of soft music. Then came a retired teacher named Eleanor who had lost her home in a financial scam. Each woman brought her own story of struggle and left with a renewed sense of hope and a foothold on a new life. They filled the room with their quiet courage and, in turn, they helped to heal the house, and me. They replaced the bad memories with good ones, their resilience seeping into the very walls. I'm telling you this story not for pity and certainly not for praise. I'm telling you because I think there's a Carol inside a lot of us. Maybe you've been underestimated, pushed aside, or made to feel small in your own life. Maybe you've had to fight for your home, your career, your family, or just your own peace of mind. The world can be a loud, demanding place, and it's easy to let your voice get drowned out, to let your boundaries be eroded one small compromise at a time. What I learned through this terrible ordeal is that you are never too old, never too quiet, and never too kind to draw a line in the sand. You are the sole owner of your life, the sole proprietor of your peace. You get to decide who lives there. You get to set the terms. Reclaiming my house wasn't about winning a fight against my son or his deceitful wife. It was about winning a fight for myself. It was about refusing to be erased. Now, when I sit in David's chair and the morning light streams in, warming the worn leather, I feel a different kind of peace. It's not the quiet peace of solitude anymore. It's a stronger, more purposeful peace, rooted in the knowledge that this house, this space I fought for, is now a source of strength not just for me, but for others. I didn't just get my house back, I found my purpose in it. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It wasn't an easy one to tell, but it felt important to share. My question for you is this. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you had to fight to reclaim something that was yours? Whether it was your confidence, your independence, or your own happiness? Please share your experience in the comments below. Your story could be the one that gives someone else the strength they need to fight their own battle. And if my story resonated with you, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. It helps more than you know and allows me to keep sharing these stories. Remember, no matter what storm you're facing, you have the strength to rebuild. You just have to pick up the first tool and start building.